SCARS presents Survivor Hour.
Thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of Survivor Hour. This show is for all the parents and guardians out there. If your child has a device of any kind, you will not want to miss this show. Dr. Hancock and I are joined on set with Dina Puccio. Dina is a former senior assistant district attorney from the Sex Crime Special Victims Unit of the Kings County District Attorney Office in Brooklyn, New York. And she's also the co-founder of the Raising Awareness and Prevention Project that has spoken over 370 schools worldwide, educating young people on consent and staying safe on and offline. Now, also on set with us is someone very well known to many of us in this community, Mrs. Sloan Johnson. Sloan is the interim executive director of Connect Tech Coding. She's also the former lead preventer and coordinator of the Cyber Tips program, which SCARS is a huge fan of. So welcome, ladies, to our show. You know, we know in a world of electronic devices, safety is at risk for our kids, right? And so I want to begin with you, Sloan. What do you think is the most important piece of advice that you would give to our parents and to our guardians as it relates to keeping their child safe online?
Probably the first piece of advice I would give to parents would be to lead by example. A lot of times when we talk to kids in the schools and different groups and things like that, the kids always say, well, my mom does it or my dad does it, so I don't see why I shouldn't be able to do it. It's really important for us as parents and guardians to practice what we preach, because no matter how old your kids are, whether they're 5, 10, 15, 20, they're still watching. They're watching because you are, you're their hero, you're their person. And if you can do it, then they feel they can do it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say there are certain things that parents can put into place to protect their child online? Would you even through, Cyber Tips, we always sent our parents during our trainings, to please visit that website. It has, such valuable information, thanks to you and your team. But what are some of the things that you would recommend that parents do, like for their little ones? Because I'm sure it really depends on the age of their child, right? To keep their child safe.
Well, first, be aware. Be aware of the things that your child is interested in online, and make sure that when you're putting parameters in place for them, that you include the child as a part of the conversation. A lot of times as parents, we just set rules and tell the kids, these are the rules, just follow them. So, and then when the kid breaks the rule and then they get punished because they weren't a part of the process of setting the rule, it's a bit of a more traumatic experience. So I encourage parents to sit down with their kids, let their kids know what the rules are, and say, well, what do you think is a fair punishment if you break this rule? Now, I know that's a little unorthodox and that's not the way most of us were raised, but when you include the child in the conversation, if the child does slip up and break a rule, they're less likely to act out because you've taken their device or because you limited their device time. Also, depending on the age of the child, you can put different parental controls in place. And then also, as the child gets older, find out what their password is. Every parent should know their child's password. Find out what their password is and do regular device checks. Let them know that, you're not trying to pry, but you just want to see what it is that they're doing. The other thing, some kids play video games, some kids do social media, like TikTok or Snapchat and Instagram. Follow your kids on social media, play the games that they're playing. I was 35 and my mom followed me on Instagram, and I put a post out about it like, oh goodness, help me guys, my mom just followed me on Instagram. So there's even as an adult, there's still a level of anxiety around the fact that your parent is seeing everything that you're putting out there. But I think that it makes the child more comfortable when you talk to them about it first.
Yeah, developing that relationship with them, right? Building that trust that I think is so important for us as parents to do. And these are things we just didn't discuss years ago. We didn't even have to think about this really. My girls are in their 30s, and so it wasn't something I even had to think about. It was starting, to get popular, cell phones. But yeah, we kind of have to set the precedent for them,
Definitely.
Don't we? And model that behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. SCARS does trainings, as everyone knows. We educate parents on the signs of sexual abuse and how to talk to our kids about this topic. And one of the things that we do in our trainings is we have a recommended reading list on our website, and we ask parents to go to that website and get some of those resources, obtain some of those resources from our website, so they know how to have these conversations, because not everyone knows about the risks of children online, right? We really, if we don't know, we don't know. And so one of the books on our recommended reading list is a book called Sex, Likes, and Social Media. And I am humbled and proud to have with on set the co-author of this book, Dina. And so I just want to say thank you for writing it with your partner, Allison Havey, I see on here. And you mentioned in the book, Dina, that your favorite line is, you're not teaching morality, you're teaching reality, right? And so you're having these, really honest conversations. We want our parents to have honest and frank conversations, right, with their children as it relates to sexting, sextortion, pornography. I mean, most parents, they would be shocked. Or maybe they're not, how pornography is just a few clicks away on some of these apps that children are using. And so I would ask, what advice would you give to parents?
So I think, first of all, it's interesting, and thank you for having me on. I'm a huge supporter of SCARS, and was of Cyber Tips as well, and that's how I started coming on the island very early on, thanks to Sloan. I think the most interesting thing about what's going on with pornography is that we as parents have a really hard time imagining our children being exposed to such hardcore images that promote, honestly, gender-based sexual violence. And I think as parents, we have a difficult time dealing with our child being sexual beings at all. And then the thought of them seeing this stuff and emulating it completely freaks us out on a different level. I love my Bermuda stories. When I work on Bermuda, I always get the best stories. And one of the things I found really interesting about how parents deal with it is, I've worked over 300-something schools, and never had a parent not want their child to come to a presentation of mine until it was Bermuda. And it was a mother of a son in year 7 or 8, and called the head teacher and said, I don't want my son going because of the pornography section of the presentation. So the head teacher said, can you speak to this mother? I said, absolutely. So she called me and she said, I think the work you do is great, but I don't want him coming to the presentation because of the pornography section. And I said, well, I'm not encouraging anyone to, watch pornography. In fact, I'm doing the opposite. She said, well, let me explain something to you. She said, it's just like candy. So I thought for a moment, I was like, okay. She said, if you tell a kid there's candy, they're gonna eat the candy. If they don't know there's candy, they're not gonna eat the candy. And I said, lady, with all due respect, your kid knows there's a big bowl of M&Ms locked in that cupboard.
Yep. Right.
And I guarantee he's eaten some of those M&Ms. Mm-hmm. And you as a parent have a couple of choices here. Either you can have an honest conversation about eating chocolate in moderation, healthy fashion is fine. Or once that child gets those M&Ms, they're gonna binge eat them, and they're gonna possibly have diabetes or be overweight or vomit. So either way, your kid is probably knows there's that candy. Mm-hmm. So as parents, we have to realize the fact that 79% of young people have been exposed to pornography, hardcore pornographic images, either intentionally or coincidental or just by accident, right? Number one. 80% is viewed on a phone, pornography. So they're not sitting in their duvet at midnight under the covers watching porn on their tablet. They're having accessibility to it very easily. Pornhub is, quite frankly, an easy conversation to have, because it is pretty awful what these kids are being exposed to. There's no no gray area here. So much of it is violent. However, there is enough out there in our society that is so over-sexualized that our kids are being exposed to, that desensitizes us, that we don't even realize. Look at advertising, whether it's Calvin Klein, Dolce & Gabbana, music lyrics where girls are called, excuse me, I don't know if you can say this, to be bitches and hoes and going down on young men and being violated. Start those conversations, because that's in our world, whether it's Love Island, whether it's the Kardashians, whether the influence on social media, the music videos. Let's start there. And you can have those conversations driving your kids to school about the music lyrics you're listening to, or what you're seeing on TV. Like you said, Sloan, watch what your kids are watching. Mm-hmm. Sit down and watch these shows and then have the conversations, because once you talk about the sexualization, the objectification of women, the promotion of gender-based sexual violence that is so prevalent every day in our society, the porn conversation is a lot of an easier jump then.
Right.
But talk about everything else first, because it's out there.
Yeah, and I think it's seems equally important. So as you're looking and watching what your kid's watching, watch it with them, but because you also want to understand their perspective of it. You don't just want to give them information about what they should and shouldn't do. You want to understand from their perspective as to why they're drawn to certain things.
Yeah, because we're fascinated. We're like, why?
Yeah.
Why would you watch a show like that? I don't get it. But I'm looking at it from a 58-year-old woman.
Yeah.
I'm not looking at it from a 15-year-old girl or boy.
And years ago, children only had access to pornography if it was, their father's magazine or, something that was, 3 rows behind at the like a pharmacy, where they had a magazine rack. It wasn't right on the front. And now these kids are exposed, something inappropriate can just pop up. You're Googling something you're looking for and something inappropriate can pop up. So they're seeing that.
There's access, and it used to be very discreet, but now there's such easy access.
Yeah, and Dr. Hancock, tell us about the detrimental effects of small children with, pornography. Like, that's got to affect them, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it shifts the neural networks in the brain pretty immediately to the point where, it can cause all kinds of issues. It can create emotional dysregulation. Even some behavioral problems. You might see some shifts in children's behavior to the point where they become more disrespectful or even to the point of addiction.
Right.
Once you see something at a very, very intense level, the threshold also increases, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can become a very comforting place for them. Mm-hmm. Pornography can become, like you said, addictive. It can be, this is where I'm going to go when I'm stressed. Mm-hmm. And then, what about if it spills over onto their personal life when they have relationships? Then they might expect what they've seen for their partners to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real about this. I mean, right?
More young men in the UK are being treated for erectile dysfunction on the NHS than ever before, and they're linking it to pornography addiction because they cannot sustain a relationship with a 3-dimensional person in a normal sexual situation. They need 1-dimensional hardcore images, and that goes to the whole, I'm not preaching morality, I'm teaching reality. When I speak to young men, boys especially, I'm like, I'm not here to shame you or blame you.
Right.
This is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is trying to get young people hooked. It's doing a good job. I could sit here and talk about feminism, morality. However, you are going to have physiological and physical problems because of this addiction. I've had boys as young as 11 come up to me after presentations, and I mean, they're little ditties. I mean, they're babies, and they're like, "May I ask you a question, miss?" I'm like, "Yes, of course." They're like, "How do we know if we're watching too much porn?" And I say, if you ask the question,
you're
probably watching too much porn.
Yeah.
Well, and that's just it, right? You create the threshold for becoming aroused, for instance, gets so high that anything less than that is not going to create any kind of correct.
Yeah.
I think that in Bermuda, the reality of the porn situation is that a large percentage of the pornography, especially child pornography in Bermuda, is self-generated images, right? Mm-hmm. So that mom that you were talking to of the kid who was in year 7 or 8, maybe she's not realizing that her son already has access to self-generated porn that's created by his peers.
Yeah.
Right? In Bermuda, they had this thing called Leak Week where, images get shared around and different things like that. And it's not just images that are created for 2024. They're historical images that resurface. So each time these images resurface, those young people who are in them who have realized they've made the biggest mistake of their life have to relive that trauma all over again. Yeah. But the mistake is making the image or producing the image in the first place and then choosing to send it to someone else. And once you've sent it, you've lost control of it, right? So, then it gets forwarded and shared, and then, there's the revenge porn aspect of it because I sent it to my boyfriend and now we've broken up, and because he's mad at me, he's sent it to all of his friends.
Yep.
So I want to say probably between 85 and 90% of child pornography that is found in Bermuda is self-generated. And I think there's a larger message here, right? So it's not just watching it online. It's the fact that these kids are thinking to create it and thinking that that's okay. So
I think it's interesting about that, because I think what they think is what they deem as sexual is very different than what we deem as sexual, right? So when we were growing up, we would see celebrities or pop stars or whatever, and we wanted to emulate what they look like. Now, because of what they're seeing is so overly sexualized, whether it comes to influencers or on television, when they're recreating those images, they're very sexual, but they don't understand that because that's just normal to them. So I think that's just they don't. What we might deem as sexual, they don't understand as being sexual.
Yeah.
True.
So it's it's a disconnect between we're looking at it going, oh my goodness, this is, put those things away. But because they're all doing it and that's what they're seeing, that becomes normalized to them.
Yeah.
And therefore there's a disconnect understanding. They also don't understand that, the age of having consensual sex is 16, but to have a digital image of someone of a sexual nature in your possession, y'all got to be 18.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's actually a legal difference as well,
Yes.
which doesn't make any sense either. Wait, I've got to be 16 to have sex with someone, but I can't have a photo of them till I'm 18? And that's
Right.
and they've just broke the law. So it's understanding there's legal ramifications of when they press that button. And again, revenge porn and sextortion, but they'd be the victim of the sextortion. Or I know of a situation where it was a peer-on-peer sextortion case where someone threatened to send out a sexual photo of someone if they didn't give them money, and that was in a school. Here.
Give us the definition of sextortion for the audience, for those that don't know.
Sorry, so sextortion, I assume, I apologize.
Well, just in case. I mean, I'm
Of course.
I could be one of
Sextortion-
those before I was doing this work. So
Sextortion is it's basically online blackmail. It's when you threaten to disseminate or send a photo, distribute a photo of a sexual nature without someone's consent, but you want for financial gain. And I was speaking about this earlier, that in the UK, for example, in the first 6 months of 2023, sextortion cases where there was a child's victim went up 257% from the year before. I mean, that is unbelievable. The problem, we talk about prosecution of these cases, the problem is overall, and this is worldwide, in the US and in the UK, the majority of perpetrators of these crimes are gangs. They're tech gangs. They are based, and this is true, West Africa and the Philippines. They slip into our kids' DMs or WhatsApps, but they send, an unknown number pops up, and they'll say something like, "Oh, we're friends with," and they get the most popular names of the kids of this time. Olivia. It could be whatever name. Sophie, Ella, whatever, we're friends with them. Oh, I'd like to be your friend too. The kid said to me the other day, this happens all the time when I was talking to them, I was at a school in Bermuda. And then they accept the person's friendship, and then it gets, or communication, and then they communicate back and forth, it gets a bit flirty, and then that child will send a photo, and then it's not just another kid who pretends to be there, it's someone who's an adult. And then they try to blackmail them, and they've already gotten into their phones because they're tech savvy. They say, we're going to send this to everyone in your contacts, everyone at your school, if you don't send me 150 pounds or gift cards, like Amazon gift cards. It's crazy. Wow. The problem is where do you get jurisdiction? And a young man, I was saying this earlier, in Scotland recently took his own life after he was a victim of sextortion. So it's very worrisome. And how do you prosecute these cases? Bermuda, the U.S., the U.K. are not going to extradite tech gangs from the Philippines or West Africa for these kinds of crimes.
No,
so
exactly.
It's going to be very difficult to go forward on these things.
And this is why prevention education is so important. This is why parents and guardians, have these conversations with your children. Do your homework, and find out what's going on out there, and develop that trust with your child to let them know the dangers, the risks associated with this issue, because it's serious, right?
And also, I think one of the things, again, speaking to my Bermudian kids down here, they've always they're great. They always chat with me about this stuff, and they said that they feel they're being blamed all the time. And, they're afraid to tell us as adults because they're afraid that we are going to tell them off, get upset with them. We have to let them know they're victims of all this, because at the end of the day, it's our bad. Because they didn't create Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook. We did. We, as adults, gave it to them at a very early age. We told them, figure it all out, self-regulate, get back to us when you're adults. That is unfair, and it's irresponsible of us. And then you give it to them, figure this all out. We made mistakes when we were kids.
Of course.
Right? We all did. And guess what? There was no evidence. No evidence of all the mistakes we
So
made.
true.
Well, and
So
that goes
true.
back to brain development, right? You know, the frontal lobe is not fully developed yet, the prefrontal cortex. So you're going to have issues with immediate gratification. You're going to have issues with, they're not thinking outside the box. They're not thinking futuristic. They're thinking in the moment. What do I need right now? Well, this sounds exciting. What harm can there be? And so there's this kind of immediate level of trust that the person on the other end is not going to harm them.
Yeah.
But I second what Dina said as far as, the kids not disclosing to parents because they're afraid that even though they're the victim, they're going to be the person that gets in trouble. Like if I tell my mom that this happened to me, the first thing she's going to do is take my phone. Right. But I didn't do anything wrong.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The second thing she's going to do is put all these new rules and shout at me and do all of this stuff instead of actually listening to me.
Yep.
So I always encourage parents to take a breath, to stop and actually listen to what the child is saying and then have the conversation with them afterwards. But this all starts with the whole, let's have a conversation about your online use. So remember, starting to have those conversations and setting those parameters with your kids kind of helps to make that conversation a little bit easier. So, if you're experiencing something negative online, I want you to feel comfortable coming to me as a trusted adult. Now, let's not confuse, your parent does not have to be your trusted adult.
Correct.
Right.
And I tell kids this all the time. And I explain to parents that if you're not your child's trusted adult, it's okay.
Yes.
But find out who who their trusted adult is. And make sure that your values and that person's values align. Sometimes it's an administrator at school. Sometimes it's a godparent. Sometimes it's an aunt or an uncle or an older friend of the family. As long as you are comfortable with the fact that that person is that child's trusted adult, then it's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do is ask your child, because I wasn't my son's trusted adult.
Yeah.
What's the criteria to become your trusted adult? Like,
Exactly.
why don't
I love that.
Why don't I make the cut?
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what do I have to do to
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
your trusted
Yeah.
adult? So, once he explained it to me, I was like, okay, well, some of these things I can't do because he wanted his trusted adult to be a man. Well, sorry.
Hey.
I don't I don't need that criteria.
done there.
But I
can
found
do
out
both
that
things.
his trusted adult is his godfather, and I'm okay with
Okay.
that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So as long as there is someone that you can reach out to that your child is communicating with on that level so that you can find out what's going on,
Right.
then everything should be okay. But
Yeah.
don't be flustered
Yeah. And don't get
or offended.
or offended.
Exactly.
Like if your child comes to you and says, I'm talking to somebody, I'm just not talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that.
Well, who's somebody? Like that
Yes.
should be your next
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, don't take it personally.
Don't take it
This
personally.
is great conversation. Don't go away. We will be right back. Parents, please take an interest in your child's online activity. It's not prying, it's protecting. We encourage you to do your research on what apps your child is using because it is important to keep them protected. Use privacy settings for your little ones and develop open and honest conversations around cyber safety with your teens. This helps prevent online interaction with digital predators. These predators exist and they are experts on grooming children online. So arm yourself with the knowledge and tools to safeguard your child. Visit scarsbermuda.com to learn more.
Scars Prisons Survivor Hour.
So welcome back, everyone. Before the break, Sloan, we were talking about children and teens identifying a safe adult in their life. And it may not be the parent or guardian, right? They may not feel safe sharing anything with their parent or guardian in their life. Let's talk about that a little bit, because what happens when a child or, a youth, a teen, does share something with their safe adult and it's could be something that needs to be reported or dealt with. Let's talk about both sides of that for the parent and for the child.
So first, the one thing that the safe adult needs to remember is the relationship that needs to be preserved is the relationship between them and the child that disclosed, right? So the biggest issue that we have with the kids is that I hear from them is that they're not made a part of the process. They disclose and then they're kind of put in the corner and the adults go and talk, but the adults don't realize that this has happened to them, not to the adult, and they would like to be a part of the process, even if that means just keeping them abreast. So it's the job of the trusted adult to say, okay, you know what? Debbie, this has happened to you and this is a crime. So I'm obligated to report this, but I will keep you in the loop as to what's happening. So the next step for me is to report this to the police, and then I'll let you know what happens from there. Because then now Debbie is over here saying, okay, I understand that this is the process, but, can you just let me know what's going to happen next? Because now she or he is feeling anxiety over the fact that this is going somewhere other than inside this room, right? So instead of putting them in the corner, it's really important for the adults in this process to keep them abreast of what's happening, because it's their story, not our story. It's their journey, it's their pain, their trauma, not ours. So we have to kind of work with them through that. Now, from the parent perspective, if you are not your child's trusted adult and your child's trusted adult comes to you and says, hey, Dina, Debbie disclosed to me, and I think these are the next steps we need to take. Now, not all the time will the parent be able to comprehend or handle or deal with what is happening with the child. So the trusted adult kind of has to play piggy in the middle a little bit to make sure that both sides are okay, or they just kind of have to either bring in a professional, but they have to remember that they are the child's parent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it can be a really sticky situation.
And it's hard for us as parents to listen and to hear that our child has been hurt or has done something that's put themselves at risk, been the victim of a crime. And I was saying this earlier, I'm a mom. I was a prosecutor of sex crimes, but I've got 3 daughters, and 27, 24, and 21. I've been there. We've all been there as parents, and we got to person up and deal with the fact that this is not about us. It's our job to get them through whatever difficult situation they're getting through. And whatever we got to do to help ourselves, whether it's therapy, whether you go meet a friend for a glass of wine, go for a run, get a group together of your friends to talk about it, whatever we need to do, but we need to stay strong for them.
Yeah.
And come up with practical solutions to help them. Not judge, not blame, be there for them, support them, because I can guarantee what they're going through is a lot worse than what we're going through.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And check in with them and say, what can I do that would make you feel better? What can I say to make you feel supported? Bring them into that process. It's hard. It's hard to, think like that because we're worried about ourselves and what this is doing to us. And listen, we live in a small community. Sometimes people can be judgmental, and we're worried about reputation and worried about what people are going to think. And so we're trying to protect, our reputation, our family's reputation. Like, we're just going to keep it here and we're not going to let anybody know. I heard a disclosure just last week where somebody said to the child, "You haven't told anybody, have you, about this?" And right away you're sending a message like, this isn't good if anybody finds out. But we understand the protection, but it's what the child wants. Right?
Right. We're also putting that back on the victim.
Yeah,
that's the start of victim shaming and victim blaming and making them feel that what happened is their fault when it's not. Yes. The first reaction that most adults have is self-preservation.
Yep.
Right? So they completely shut out everything that's happening with the child and focus on themselves. And that's really not the way it should be. At the end of the day, we are their protectors, their providers. We are their people. So the first instinct that we should have, which isn't always the case, is, okay, what can I do to protect the child? And that doesn't mean asking them, okay, so have you told anybody about this? Like, well, what did you do to make this person do this to you? Or, stop asking those questions and start asking the questions that the child actually needs to answer. Okay, well, can you tell me exactly what happened? And what were you doing at the time? What were you thinking about at the time? Can you tell me what happened after? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to ask in order to get the information that we need to make the next steps the right way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And kind of along the lines of what you said earlier about, we want kids, we're asking them to have a voice to get information, but then we want to shut them out. And then you're just compromising trust. Mm-hmm. Because if you shut them out and you don't let them either be in the know, right? When somebody's been traumatized, many times there's a hyper focus on wanting to know what's next, wanting to know exactly what's going to happen, as a protective measure.
Yeah.
But then if we shut them out as though, we're going to deal with it for you, then you're going to compromise their ability to trust you. And especially the approach, if we go in trying to interrogate them by asking a bunch of questions rather than, helping them through, What is it that I can do to help make you feel more comfortable? What is it, what do you feel like you need right now? And it may just be a hug. It may just be, I just need to spend time with you. But ask them, kids know what they want, and they know, they'll tell you what they need if you ask them.
If we dig a little deeper into what you, both Debbie and Sloan were saying earlier about blaming victims, right? And, have you told anyone? If that child got their phone stolen, if they got beat up on Front Street, if they had their backpack stolen, no one would say, have you told anyone about this? Have you?
Right.
Because the difference of how we blame victims of anything having to do with a sexual offense is completely different than being the victim of any other crime.
Yeah.
So true.
Yep.
And this is why conviction rates are so low. This is why kids don't come forward, victims don't come forward, because they are immediately blamed. And therefore, they've got to get over so many stigmas of what did they do. And I was saying earlier a story about a friend of mine's son who was basically on a bus in North London, a public bus, and he's 14 years old, adult male sits next to him, only two on the bus, and the bus driver. And the man kept asking him questions, and my friend's son was answering the questions, and then the guy started touching him sexually on his leg and going up towards his groin area. Yeah. And my friend's son did the right thing. He stopped, he got the bus driver's attention, et cetera, and they stopped the bus. They arrested the defendant. When I've asked young men particularly about what they would do in a situation like that after responding with violence, one young boy on Bermuda said, well, I would say, no, thank you, I'm not gay. And I had to explain, I do this over and over again, what happened to that boy on the bus had nothing to do with sexual orientation, identification. It was an adult man perpetrating a crime on a child.
Exactly.
Yep.
And sex crimes, whether it's online or offline, is very rarely about sexual gratification. It is more likely about power and control. And once we change our mindset, and once we understand that, we will be able to treat this crime how it deserves to be treated and stop blaming victims and allow people, young and old, to come forward and stop feeling the shame that they feel.
Yeah.
Because if they were the victim of any other crime, like I said, house being burgled, being punched in the face, something being stolen from them, they would never question their culpability in it. It's all that person who did it to them.
Yeah.
Sex crime's completely different.
Yeah. And I think I've spoken with male survivors, and I think that plays a huge part, especially if their perpetrator is a male.
Yeah.
Right away, they have to live with this fact. Am I gay? Am I only interested in men, or why? I do like women, but now I'm confused. I think there's a lot of confusion around that. When anybody is sexually molested by an older person, there's just so much confusion, especially with the same gender, right? It can be so confusing.
Well, there's an assumption that because there's arousal that they, that in their mind that, well, maybe I wanted it. And that is completely false.
Right.
Your body responds physiologically whether or not it's invited or not,
Exactly.
or consented or not.
Exactly. And it's very difficult. This whole topic is difficult because there's so much shame around what we deal with. There's just so much shame, and it's silencing. And also it's a lot of, what did I do to cause this? Why did this person say it was my fault? What did I do to make them be interested sexually in me? And like you said, Dina, this is about power and control. Some of it can be sexual gratification. They might have a propensity to be, obsessed with and thinking about it constantly, and they just got to have it. But it is about power and control. That's what abuse is about. Whether it's physical, mental, sexual, it doesn't matter. It's all about power and control.
And once we all accept that as a society, and we come and we acknowledge that it's not the victim's fault, that that it is the perpetrator's fault, then as parents, as carers, as whatever, teachers, whatever, we can allow them the voice that they need to come forward. They're afraid of going through the criminal justice system. They're going to be asked questions that a person who got their backpack stolen or their house burgled would never be asked. They're going to be asked if they were drinking alcohol. They're going to be, what were you wearing? Have you been a victim of this crime before? And the thing about it is, I will tell you this from my experience of doing this for so long when I was back in the DA's office, very rarely did a person not have done it before.
Yes.
What I always found is maybe they haven't been charged, but people are coming out of the woodwork, and they would say, "Well, we heard that he did this to a cousin once," and because it's a sociopathic crime,
Yeah.
right?
They perfect their method over and over.
I say to kids all the time, if they've done it to you, I'm guaranteeing you they've done it before, and they're going to do it again.
Yes.
And you don't want to put that on the victim, but that's the reality.
Yes.
And very rarely did I not get a rap sheet or equivalent thereof of that thick of allegations. And also the allegations get worse.
Yep.
They get more bold and they get more brazen in the crimes they commit. So it might start with just a touching, and then it will go. They got away with that because no one said anything, and then it's got to maybe a more touching, and then it gets to penetration and keeps going and going and going because they've been able to get away with it.
Yeah. And abusers are very manipulative. They, when we talk about consent, no is no, but they could make a victim feel like they want it. So they've already convinced them, even though you said no to me, and they're so persuasive. It can be very manipulative and deceptive.
They're patient.
Oh, very.
They don't, it's like the online grooming situation or even the sextortion. So online and offline, right? It's the same sort of mentality.
They let them believe they're in control. They let the victims believe they're in control.
So what happens is they build up a trust, right? And one of the things about online grooming is that a trust is built up between the child and the adult who's pretending to be a child, right? And this could take days or weeks or months. And then when the adult reveals that they're not really the other 15-year-old kid who, goes to that school, but they're a 50-year-old man, they're already emotionally invested.
And attached, right? So the attachment.
That investment, that attachment is there. And they're more likely to do things sexually with that person that they would not have thought about doing because they have that attachment, that physical feeling, that emotional feeling towards, and there's the trust.
Yes.
So when young people, particularly teenagers, pre-teens, when their bodies are changing and, everything in their life is going wrong, which is normal, right? They're not getting along with their friends and their teachers are driving them crazy. We're driving them crazy, right? There's someone out there who gets them, who loves them. And then they're more likely to do things that they would never think of doing because they feel that, like you said, attachment, emotion, maybe even gratitude for that person giving them a voice.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Making them feel pretty or handsome or important.
Validated. Listened to.
Yeah.
So that's another. So predators now, we were talking earlier, is having online evidence easier to prosecute. It is. The problem is that predators now have another way to get to our kids. Back in the old days, it was don't speak to strangers, right? So you came out of the school gate and you saw the stranger. That was a stranger. I don't know who you are. You stay away. But we don't know who's behind that mask, who's behind that screen. So now predators have got another way to get to our children.
And as you said earlier, much earlier about, the fact that they're kind of choosing different friends' names just out of picking names out of a hat and hoping that it'll stick.
They know they're clever. They know
dangerous.
They know the sites our kids are on. Like you said, the games they play. They know what's popular. They, who's a Swiftie, who's, whatever it is. You go online and you Google an age and you can find out, the shops they shop at, they whatever. And then you create a profile. And then all of a sudden that relationship gets built based on someone thinking that they're your age and they know you and they know what you're going through. And in reality, it's an adult hiding behind a screen.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that parents really need to get a handle on right now is AI.
Oh, that's
yeah.
So AI is making this whole online virtual crime world 10 times worse than it already is.
Yeah.
So we have things like morphing, where you take my face and put it on, the body of a porn star, or, and these things are what our kids are doing to each other.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't get a picture of you naked, so I'm going to take your face from another photo that you have online and I'm going to plaster onto this naked body, and then I'm going to send it around and tell everybody that it's you.
Yeah.
Right? Even, AI can do pictures, videos, voice recognition. So I really think it's important for parents to not just find out what their kids are doing, and be abreast of what their kids are doing, but also to stay on top of the evolving technologies, because it's only going to get worse, right? Now, keep in mind, and Dina did mention this earlier, these technologies were not created to be used negatively.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
They were created to make our lives easier, to make our lives better.
Faster.
But
With everything.
there are people who choose to use it in a negative way.
Yes.
Right?
It's like the internet.
Right.
Right?
So
Yep.
I think it's important to understand, like, I have a lot of parents tell me, well, social media is the devil and I'm not going to allow my kids to have social media. And I tell them, like, it's all about how we choose to use social media. Like, for instance, I'm the only sibling of all of my siblings that lives in Bermuda. We're all spread out all over the US and Bermuda, right? So I literally watch my nieces and nephews grow up
Yeah.
online.
Which has been
And if I didn't have that, I would miss out on so much. So when you use social media in a positive way, and you have people who have, influencers who are positive, like, body positivity, and, they're given these platforms to talk about social issues and, political issues and different things like that. They're using the power, we call it, that they have for good, right?
Yes.
But then you also have people who say, okay, well, I can use it for these nefarious purposes. And our kids these days can't really tell the difference, because sometimes it's a really fine line as to what's positive media and what's negative media. So part of the conversation that we're having with them needs to be how to determine the two.
Yeah.
Right. And you also mentioned earlier that, our kids are not disclosing. And we always have these conversations about normalizing, having these conversations, normalize, having your kids come forward and, remove the stigma that surrounds, reporting sex crimes and, online crimes and different things like that. But our kids are disclosing, but they're disclosing to people who they think will understand. Even if it's not a trusted adult, they're disclosing to their peers. They're disclosing. But so what we need to do is remove the stigma of disclosing to an adult.
correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they are talking about it.
Yeah. And it's how we react.
They're just not talking
And
about
that
it
goes
to
to
us.
personing up and dealing with it, not
Well,
freaking out, which we
right.
did really well. Well, I hear you.
Well, and it's getting away then from having this kind of lecturing mentality with your kids, which again, all in good intentions to educate them and to help them understand.
But that's like the Bermudian way.
Right.
Right. But that's the first thing we go to is we shout and lecture.
And then, as parents, you almost have to say, okay, well, this isn't working, so I need to do something different. And the different is being able to let them have the platform. If you want to understand, then you have to let them talk. You have to let them share without jumping into rescue.
So
That's such a good point.
That's-
because that's
yeah.
what
That
we
is
do
a
as
good point.
parents. We have fear. We don't want anything to happen to them.
that is so true. But my question for you, Dr. Hancock, is once a child has disclosed or once we've realized that the child has experienced trauma, what are the next steps as far as the child is concerned from, your perspective, like from a professional, a health professional, mental health professional perspective? Do we put them in therapy? How do we help these children to move forward? How do we help them to deal with, we don't want them to compartmentalize because then they haven't dealt with it, right? Mm-hmm. What would you consider to be next steps for a child that has, disclosed?
Yeah, well, and so first and foremost, it's like when I look at when a child has been victimized, you're looking, it's a very systemic intervention. So it's not just put the child in therapy and let them have a therapist and they deal with it themselves. The parents have to be involved because as parents, you are also going to have a bit of trauma as a result of hearing this information. Oftentimes there's unintentional guilt. There's just your own concept of feeling like your child's been victimized, and maybe it triggered something for you. So first, for the parent, it's acknowledging how this has made you feel or what's triggered for you to deal with your own emotions regarding it so that you can effectively communicate with your child and know how to comfort your child, rather than going into a lecture or an interrogation kind of conversation with them. But yeah, therapy, family therapy, helping the child to cultivate, a trust with the parents so that they can talk to you about it. Letting them have a platform to discuss what they're feeling without jumping in to rescue. Ask them what they need and how they're feeling. Oftentimes, if they have outside elements like sports or music or, that can help to help in the healing process, because it's building back up their ability to integrate themselves back in without it overshadowing their entire being, which many times does happen. You don't want all of your conversations to just be about the abuse. You also want to balance still setting boundaries, but also, again, letting them be able to talk about it with you. Because you don't want to be a situation, you see a lot of times where if something's happened to the child that, all boundaries are very flexible. It's like, well, this happened to my child, so I'm going to be a little easy on them. You don't want to take away all of the rules and expectations. You also don't want to encourage them to fear taking healthy risks, like going to friends' houses or engaging in extracurricular activities, because again, that might sometimes be one of the impacts, is they want to avoid everything.
Right.
And you don't want them to do that, but there's ways to do it healthy. But yeah, therapy, family therapy, so that to help them heal.
Okay.
Even writing and journaling. I think that's
Oh,
so
absolutely.
important for survivors to, kind of get out their feeling. They may not want to talk to somebody about it, but they might journal it. They might want to write it in a journal, or, find some sort of outlet. That music or sailing or, gymnastics or, running. I mean, there's so many things that really will help them, deal with those feelings. And it's not so much escaping, as long as it's healthy, but it's, going to a place that they feel joy, where they feel, because we're made of something. We all have a purpose, right? We all feel joyful. Not everybody is joyful when they listen to music. A lot of people are. Not everybody's joyful when they draw, but some people are. And just finding that place for that child, what that child's gift is, and say, this is what makes me feel happy when I go to this place.
Yeah. It's rekindling the sense of worth that has probably been lost as a result of the abuse.
Taken away from them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, stolen from them, because that's what happens, right? It's stolen from the abuser, who feels that they're entitled to do that.
Hence the power.
Hence the power, right? We go right back to power. That's what abuse is all about.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a short break, and we will be right back.
You probably get lots of messages every day, but what if you got one like this? What would you do? Would you send a picture? No? Cool. That's an easy way to protect yourself. But what if you'd chosen differently? What if you send the picture? They'd never share it with anyone else, right? Do you want the picture shared with others? Sorry, you no longer have a choice. It's out of your hands now, because sometimes people we trust break that trust. Maybe the person you sent the picture to shows it to some friends. Maybe they send it to a couple friends, who send it to a couple more friends, who... You get the idea. It spreads, and you never know who might see it. Your little brother? Your mom? Other people at school?
I would never.
Even strangers could get a hold of your picture. You never really know where that picture will end up.
Look at it.
How long it will be out there? Or what the consequences will be. Don't let others decide what happens to your image. Think before you share. Learn more at netsmarts.org. And hey, if your image is already out there, know that it's not your fault. For information about removing sexual pictures and videos from the internet, visit missingkids.org/gethelpnow.
Scars presents Survivor Hour.
Welcome back, everyone. We are with Sloan Johnson, and we are excited to have you here, and Dina Puccio. Dina, as a former prosecutor, people are confused sometimes about this word consent. Can you share with us a little bit about, what is consent?
Okay.
And help the audience understand, have a broader knowledge when it comes to consent.
The fact that there's a confusion really upsets me. As a former prosecutor, as a woman, as a feminist, it just makes me crazy because women more likely are the victim of these crimes. Over 95% of victims of sexual assault and rape identify themselves as female. And I just think about this, that first of all, consent legally it's an agreement. It is mutual. It is based on information. It's based on knowledge. It's allowing someone to do something to you sexually or you to do something to them sexually with no fear, no fraud, no coercion, no manipulation, no force of any kind. And it's revocable at any time. If you've done something with someone sexual in the past, you are not obliged or expected to do it again in the future. You've done something with someone sexually on a Saturday night, you're not supposed to then be expected to do it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And if you start something, you can stop. Consent is finite and has to be given over and over again in the affirmative. As people, we have agency over our choices. If I decide I'm going to try to run that 5K today, but it's raining, it's miserable, you know what? I don't really want to run this. I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to get a coffee. I can do that. If I start a meal and I don't like it or I'm full, I'm allowed to push it away. We are all allowed to have agency over our choices. Same thing when it comes to any sort of sexual activity. And when it comes to consent and how victims are questioned in our society, by police, by society. And I said, if I'm walking down Front Street or anyone with a nice expensive handbag, which we see women doing all the time, and it's coming out of a restaurant and someone knocks me to the ground and takes my handbag, the police are not going to look at me and say, so you just came out of that restaurant. Were you drinking alcohol before you had your handbag stolen? Excuse me, why is your skirt short? Or, what are you doing carrying that expensive handbag? They're going to ask me what the perpetrator looked like, and they're going to try to figure out who committed the crime, and then they're going to go forward with relevant evidence, right? If a victim of a sexual crime happens, they get questioned about whether they drank alcohol. And when it comes to alcohol, it comes to consent. If I walked in this room and I was drunk, you'd pretty much be able to figure that out. If someone is drunk, and this isn't brain surgery, you could see common sense whether someone is drunk or not, they don't have the capacity to consent to anything, let alone sexual activity. Same exact thing. So it's about stop blaming the victims. It doesn't matter whether someone is wearing a short skirt or showing cleavage. It's got nothing to do with how someone looks like. Women in burqas get raped. Women in nuns' habits gets raped. Again, power and control.
Yeah.
So I feel consent is quite straightforward. When it comes to young people specifically, relationships, get to know the person. Friendship, romance, intimacy, have a safe word. Be comfortable to have these very difficult conversations of what you feel comfortable doing and not doing, particularly because of the amount of pornography that young people are watching and the fact that so much of porn lacks consent. It lacks mutual respect, mutual consent. And therefore, if a young person, by the way, more likely being a boy, is watching hardcore pornography from the age of 11 or 12 years old, and they then are in a consensual relationship from 16, they don't understand that what they've been seeing, getting aroused by, is not what we want, and is violent and is criminal.
Right.
And that's why all of these issues, online safety and offline safety, consent, all of it connect right now.
Right.
Because of the way our kids are living their lives.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautifully put. And let's make it quite clear that children can't give consent. Period. End of story, because the law dictates who can consent and who cannot, and children can't consent. Okay? 16 is the age of consent in Bermuda. Anybody under that age cannot consent. Am I correct in saying that?
Yep, you are correct in saying that. I also think it's important for parents especially, to remember that consent forms are everywhere, right? So we have to consent to having our child's picture taken for school or for sports. I had to consent to being on the show today. It's important that people understand what consent is and where and when specifically that it's needed. Everything that Dina said is amazing, but most of it speaks to person-to-person contact. But I want people to understand that the same thing that she said for person-to-person contact is relevant when you're speaking to someone online. Like, you know what I mean? In Bermuda, it is an offense to share an image of someone else without their consent. So when we think about that, we're like, what? Because I would share your picture and say, happy birthday, Debbie. Like, you know what I mean? So, but do I have your permission? Do I have your consent to share that image? 9 times out of 10,
No.
I don't. But because a lot of times we do things in a non-malicious manner, it just kind of gets swept to the side and we don't really talk about it. But when it comes to our kids, they're sharing images and videos of each other without consent, and it's of a malicious nature, right? So, you know, or of a sexual nature, or, you know, and these young kids, they did not consent to that. We've had cases where girls were recorded changing in the bathroom after gym class. They didn't consent to that. So consent is a very important issue. And, you know, like we talked about earlier, it can be a little bit confusing for some people. So I like the way Dina just broke it down, like the what, the where, the how, the who, the when, and, you know, and the fact that it's revocable at any time.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people don't realize that once they've given it, that they can take it back.
Right. Especially young girls who are, you know, again, going out with their friends. I've heard the stories, you know, the idea that, you know, they may have initially consented and then the inability to feel like they can stop at any time doesn't register.
Yeah.
It doesn't register.
No, it's not okay. And I think these conversations need to start early and often in the home. It really does. And also model that behavior in the home. So your child knows, oh yeah, I see that my parent or my guardian or the people I live in my house, they ask for consent. They're under, you know, so that they understand what consent looks like. If nobody's explained to them what consent looks like, how do they know? If nobody's modeling that, how do they know?
A lot of people don't even realize that in extracurricular activity scenarios, consent should be offered at all times as well. So a lot of people know that my husband is a martial artist. He teaches Taekwondo. And one of the first things I noticed when we were dating is, and, you know, I would just pop up to the dojo because that's my boo. And if a young lady or a young man, any student was doing pomse wrong or their form needed to be corrected, he would say, do I have permission to touch your arm?
Love it.
And then he would adjust their arm. Or do I have permission to touch your leg?
Wow.
And then he would adjust their leg. But he never has ever put his hand on a student without asking that student if he has their permission first. And that's for children and adults.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, normalizing asking for consent is something that we should definitely work towards as a community, because children need to understand that no one should touch you without your permission.
Even an adult.
Even an adult.
Yeah. Even just changing a child's clothes. We talk about it on the training. You know, do I have permission to what, you know, but years ago, no way that nobody, you didn't ask for permission from your children. You just did it, right? And
even now, we generationally, right? Things that happened years ago, which I earlier, are not acceptable now, right? There's a TikTok reel going around talking about social media being funny, and it shows a person sits down in a barber's chair, a man, and an older man, like maybe in his 30s, 40s, and the barber says, "Hi, my name is so and so. I, he, him. I'm a he, him. And can I touch you?" And the guy's like, "I want you to cut my hair." It's like, I know, but do I have permission to touch you? And there's this disconnect that goes on between the professional doing what we expect now, saying, "Can I touch you? You know, are you okay with this?" And the guy in the barber chair who is older, not understanding that it was his right to say no, and that being asked was something should have been happening in his life the whole time.
Like there's assumed consent.
Exactly. And that's something that we can't assume it.
No.
Wow, this has been a great conversation, everyone. I've recently heard about this amazing organization called Thorn. They are an innovative technology nonprofit who is on a mission to make the internet safer and eliminate child sexual abuse material. So that's some good news. There are organizations out there really fighting this. But we are grateful that you spent this hour with us. This topic isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. But if, like we said, knowledge is power. And so we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next Survivor Hour show.